I got a letter from the EU Commission, like saying, to not have disinformation on during this discussion that we're having, and there's a lot of attempts to do censorship and to force censorship even on Americans from other countries.
This was Elon Musk during a live chat with the former president, Donald Trump, last week on X, referring to a letter he received just before the interview from the EU's Commissioner for Internal Markets, Thierry Breton. Breton was particularly concerned about disinformation after seeing how misinformation on X had contributed to last week's UK riots. He warned that their conversation might run afoul of the EU's Digital Services Act if it wasn't properly moderated. But Musk, never one to shy away from a fight, fired back with a Tropic Thunder meme that basically told the EU to mind its own business, albeit in stronger language. Not to be outdone, the CEO of X also jumped into the fray, accusing the EU of trying to meddle in American affairs and patronizing Europeans by stifling free speech. And of course, Trump's campaign wasn't going to miss out on all the action either, declaring that the EU should stay in its lane and calling it an enemy of free speech. Is this true though? Do Europeans not have the same freedoms as Americans? And just how different are our free speech rules on this side of the pond compared to the US? We'll dive into all of that in this video. To get to the bottom of the differences in free speech between the US and Europe, we need to do a little comparison of the key legal texts, the First Amendment of the US Constitution and Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. But don't worry, we'll try to keep it light. First, the US approach. The First Amendment is the gold standard of free speech protection and is as straightforward as it gets. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. In plain English, the US government is hands off when it comes to what you say. This is the no strings attached version of free speech. Now the European take, where we have Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which reads, everyone has the right to freedom of expression, but this can be limited to protect national security, public safety, health, morals, and a whole list of other things. So Europe's approach to free speech is more like, you've got free speech, but let's not go too crazy with it. The idea here is that your right to express yourself is important, but it might need to be balanced against other rights and societal interests, such as privacy, dignity, and non-discrimination. You might have already noticed the clear differences in the use of language here, but let's start by focusing on what the US and Europe have in common. In both the US and Europe, political speech is protected as a vital part of democratic participation. Both regions also have strong judicial oversight. In the US, the Supreme Court plays a key role in interpreting these rights, while in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights serves a similar function. After the European courts, national courts in each EU country also play a crucial role in applying and enforcing these principles. Freedom of the press is another area where both the US and Europe align, ensuring that independent journalism can hold power accountable. And finally, both recognize that free speech isn't absolute. There are accepted limits on things like obscenity, direct threats, incitement to violence, or incitement to panic. For example, neither the US or Europe would tolerate someone shouting, "There's a bomb on this plane," as part of a joke. So while both countries recognize that there's some limit to free speech, the EU typically extends these restrictions further than the US. Also, the European Court of Human Rights provides considerable flexibility to national courts, meaning that the exact limits on freedom of speech can vary significantly from one European country to another. So what are these limits? Today we will cover 3, starting with the big one, hate speech. In the US, hate speech is generally protected unless it directly incites violence or illegal actions. In Europe, it's a different story. There's more of a balancing act, where certain forms of hate speech are simply not tolerated. But enough of the theory, let's look at some real-world examples. In Austria and Germany, Nazi symbols, gestures, and acts that glorify or endorse the Nazi regime are strictly prohibited. For instance, earlier this year, 4 Germans were arrested in Austria after placing white roses at Adolf Hitler's birthplace, with one of them giving a Nazi salute. Similarly, a legislator from the far-right Alternative for Germany was arrested for using the Nazi Sieg Heil salute. Holocaust denial is another form of hate speech that's illegal in many European countries. For example, earlier this year in France, authorities arrested a known Holocaust denier emphasizing that Holocaust denial is a gross insult to the Jewish community and others who perished in places like Auschwitz. In the US, while such actions are heavily frowned upon and can carry serious social consequences, it's not illegal to deny the Holocaust or make a Nazi salute. The next limit is defamation. In the US, defamation laws are more lenient, especially for public figures who have to prove actual malice, meaning the person knew that the statement was false or didn't care if it was. A recent example is Sarah Palin's case against the New York Times in 2022. She sued over an editorial linking her to a mass shooting, but the court dismissed the case because Palin couldn't prove the newspaper acted with actual malice. This shows how the US prioritizes free speech, even if it means some statements can harm reputations. In contrast, the EU has stricter defamation laws, with a lower burden of proof and more focus on protecting personal reputation. Take Marine Le Pen's case in France in 2017. She sued a TV host who showed a satirical image of her face on a feces-covered animal, and the court ruled in her favor, emphasizing the importance of protecting personal dignity, something that's given more weight in the EU than in the US. However, it is a bit subjective, as Johnny Depp, for example, won his defamation case just a couple of years ago against Amber Heard. And then the third limit is privacy. In the US, privacy protections are weaker, especially for public figures, because free speech is often prioritized, even if it invades someone's privacy. The EU, however, has strong privacy rules, including the right to be forgotten. For example, a Spanish lawyer successfully requested that Google remove links to an old newspaper article about his past financial issues. The European Court of Justice ruled in his favor, requiring Google to delete the links, illustrating the EU's strong emphasis on privacy and the protection of personal reputation, even when it restricts the availability of information online. Now, it goes without saying that both the US and the EU highly value freedom of speech, and the claims by Trump and Musk that Europe has no freedom of speech are simply not true. Comments like the one Musk made just before the UK riots could be seen as an incitement to violence, which has been illegal in the US, UK, and the EU for decades. The difference lies in how each region approaches it. The US prioritizes free speech over most other rights, often allowing it to override concerns about hate speech, privacy, and defamation. In contrast, the EU takes a more balanced approach. While free speech is highly valued, it is carefully weighed against other fundamental rights, such as the protection of personal dignity, reputation, and privacy. The EU's goal is not to limit free speech, but to ensure it does not unjustly harm individuals or disrupt societal harmony. But what do you think? Is the EU right to intervene? Or how would you address the challenge of misinformation or hate speech? Thank you so much for watching. If you're hungry for more, don't miss out on our video on whether we really need NATO, or dive into why the EU even exists. Spoiler alert, it's a key reason we're not constantly at war in Europe, and this video will show you why. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and if you want to support us even more, consider joining our Patreon. See you in the next video.